a little spin. But you don't know how to drive.
Don't go. What about our relationship?
What?
What about our relationship?
Fuck that.
You shit! I'm glad I tortured you. How could you leave me? I'm the one who's supposed to be in that car.
And health is a beholder.
Best goddamn car in the yard.
Wow. This is intense. Life of a repo man is always intense.
A number of years ago, I'd gone with my pop to a local community swimming pool. And in that pool, there was a steam bath. It was just like like a typical mid-sized room with a lot of hot steam, coming into it. And ordinary day, summer day, nice outside, nothing unusual. I was sitting in the steam bath, and I don't usually go to steam baths. I mean, there aren't a lot of them around locally. You might see a sauna in a local pool, but an actual, functioning steam bath is uncommon. So I've been swimming a bit, and I decided I'd, get up and go check out the steam bath. And I sat in there for probably about 10, 15 minutes, and I just started to daydream. It was a vivid daydream. And what happened in the daydream was I had a kind of like a intense, colorful visual image that I was in some place that seemed to feel like heaven. It was like a heavenly type place. It was like the sense was it was after my life. I was in some other area, some other place. And in that place, in the daydream, I was interacting with other people that I seemed to be familiar with. I think my dad may have been there. And we were like having a chat in this place. And it could have been like a table or something, but we were sitting in front of a flat table-like surface. And on that surface, there was what looked like these books. They were like fair-sized books, and that they were very similar to like a photo album, and thick. And we were all of us sort of together flipping through the pages of this photo album, and the pictures or the images or the photos that were in these albums were animated, so they weren't just photos, but they were like moving scenes. Very similar to what I've seen in, like some of the Harry Potter movies where they have newspapers and the photos or the images in the newspapers move. And the photos in the album were the memories of our lives at different points in life. So we would look at a page and we'd see, a square frame for an image. And as we would focus on it, we would hear the sounds of, a certain point in our life of, what was happening in the scene, the people talking, and we would see people moving around. And it was a bit of a trippy experience because if I recall correctly, as we were reviewing, and it was, the idea was it was all of our life, like our entire life. And if memory serves, what I recall was as we would focus on a given frame or picture, it was as though we were reliving the experience, because the more we would focus on it, the more active that experience seemed to become. And I remember that in that situation, some of the reactions that we had to viewing memories of our life was curious to me as the observer having the daydream of this happening, because I remember some of the thoughts were, humor. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was puzzlement. Sometimes it was wonder. One of the sensations that seemed really curious to me was that I remember we were sitting around looking at some of these photos, and something would happen experientially, and because of the frame of reality that we were now in that was beyond this lifetime, we couldn't relate to what we had been experiencing in this life. And it might have been something along the lines of, maybe there was a memory of feeling upset or anguish or some kind of stress. And then in the mind context of this being in this other place, we would look at this and I remember it was something like we were scratching our heads thinking like, why are we upset about that? Or how could we have been upset about that? So this was basically the daydream, and I'm saying this for a reason. I've got another few stories to tell you as well, and I'll tie this in later. But something that I personally found frustrating, and I think that probably a lot of our viewers have too. When you're a little kid, you have lots of questions. You want to know often, about things like, what is time? Why does it exist? What is gravity? What is the nature of space? What is the mind? Is the mind the same thing as the brain? And the frustration comes when we get, at best, ambiguous answers. And, it's very strange and funny, how it seems as though some of the most important questions that we have about our very existence don't get answered very well. Like, it's very strange, isn't it? It's like we can put a man on the moon, supposedly. I believe that we did. But we can't cure cancer, supposedly. And, somehow, even though we can get an astronaut to the moon, we can't really figure out somehow, for some reason, what is the true nature of space? What is space? Why does time exist? So, for myself, just in my own personal journey, one of the things that I found is there's a few reasons that we don't get the kinds of answers that we want, the fundamental questions. And unfortunately, that's often because at some level, special interests are not served when certain groups of people have kinds of information. And not only is there, historical evidence and context for this, but some of the lengths that are gone to by special interest groups to withhold information from large sections of the public is just stunning. Some of you may have heard before, perhaps you haven't. I'm just shaking at my shaker here. When calculus was first discovered, it was used by the British Navy, for plotting the trajectory of cannonballs launched from naval ships. And it was illegal for the general public or citizens to have any understanding of calculus, because they didn't want anyone but their own, military to know, how do we shoot a cannonball in the air and have a good chance of hitting the target. And, we see a reflection of this today, wherein, for a good chunk of time, ultra fine and precise GPS coordinates were not available to the public. And to a degree, they still aren't. Like if you look at government, satellite imaging, they can get extremely fine, precise measurements down to a postage stamp, perhaps smaller, as to an accurate location. But for a very long period of time, the general public, you didn't get that kind of ultra precise GPS coordinate. And you think about it, why? Like if something as important as, where are you? What's your actual physical location in time and space? Is that important? It's actually extremely important for all kinds of reasons, a lot of which you probably haven't been told about before. But one of the most important reasons is because if you have a fundamental grasp on what your orientational axis is in time-space, then you have a chance of figuring out not only where you are, but you have a very strong understanding and the ability to build a relationship between your actual location and where you want to be. So it becomes harder for outside influences to control you through confusion. It's very easy to direct a confused animal. Like in ancient China and in other places, if they were hunting animals, they take the beaters with the drums, right? And they would make noises and scare them, and then try to corral them in a certain direction. And so we're going to cover these kinds of issues in the upcoming videos. And for today, I want to cover some of the key concepts coming up and understand that many of the dynamics and rules that govern the natural world so too govern the paranormal realms. And there's many reasons for this, but what I want to do is I want to give you, before we begin this, an understanding that one of the ways that extra dimensions relate to each other is that as dimensions grow, they often have an orthogonal relationship to each other. And there's a very simple way to understand this. So I'm going to give you an example that's both spatial and energetic, dimensional-wise. So I want you to imagine a globe, like a sphere. When you were in school, you may have had like an actual round globe. You spin it around, you could see the different countries. So we demarcate, or we describe a position in time-space through longitude and latitude. So we have vertical and horizontal lines that cross a globe. And then so our global positioning coordinates comprise of a latitude and a longitudinal coordinate number. So orthogonal means 90 degrees. So latitude is at a 90-degree angle to longitude. And so we see that these are different dimensions. So you have length and width. So length and width are at 90 degrees to each other. But I want you to conceptualize this. If you were on the surface of a globe, and we could describe your position by longitude and latitude, there are other directions that we can go that are at 90 degrees of both longitude and latitude. So what is that? Well, it's up and down. So if you were to accelerate up into space, this would be altitude. And so we know that our altitude is an extra dimension of space, and it's at 90 degrees of both longitude and latitude. So what I want you to understand is, as dimensions increase in time and energy, one of the ways that they increase is by an orthogonal vector. And laws and dynamics that govern the natural world are often shared in the paranormal realms, but in some cases the way they manifest is at a 90-degree or similar type of relationship. And we'll get into that. This is very helpful because it lets us understand a number of key characteristics about the paranormal realms. One of my greatest mentors was a professor of astrophysics at Stanford. He had tenure there for a number of years, and he taught me for a number of years in a very specific number of subjects, and it was private training that I was given. A little bit expensive, but well worth it. And he told me a story once that I had never forgotten. He's a scientist. He was also an expert in something called heliocentric astrology, which is a very rare form of an exotic kind of astrology. And he was in the top global expertise range in that. He's literally been a consultant for heads of state, or the heads of states, countries, and he's done a lot of phenomenal work. And so he told me a number of years ago that I think this is when he was a junior in high school. He'd wanted to be a scientist, and so he had entered a science fair, and he won. And the prize was that he was given this pass to take a train or trains all over the continental United States for, I think it might have been like a month or two. And the deal was that the people that granted the prize had constructed the prize so that he had a chance as a high school student to visit some of the major colleges and universities in the U.S. And if I remember correctly, this was over the course of a summer. The idea was that he takes a train to a given city, he gets off the train, representatives of the local college or university greet him, they take him back to the school, they give him a tour, he gets a chance to see what the schools are like, and he's introduced to, because it was a science fair and because he's interested in science, what they do is they introduce him as a student to local science professors and local scientists that are working institutionally at that educational facility. So it's supposed to be inspiring, right? You got a young high school student that wants to be a scientist. He gets a chance to go to these, in some cases, some of them are probably Ivy League schools. Gets a chance to talk to the local bigwigs there. They'll give him a tour through the local laboratories and the local classrooms, and give him like a real-time, real-world view of what it would be like for him if he became a student in the sciences at their educational facility. So the purpose of the gift, the purpose of the reward, was to give him, a lot of motivation towards pursuing his career. So he's telling me the story, and he told me that before he got on the train and he really wanted to be a scientist, he said he'd had a very specific impression and goal and profile and aspiration of what being a scientist was about. And he said to him, the kind of scientist that he wanted to be and the kind of scientist he thought mattered was someone who was like a rugged individualist, a pioneer, someone that was an explorer, like on the boundaries of reality, like a brave soul, going through an interesting life experience. And he said that after he got on the train, he started to visit these different facilities, and he said, I think he had said something like, he must have maybe gone to like, it might have been as little as 3 or 4, or maybe he had gone to as many as 5 or 6 schools. But he said every time he got off the train and the representatives of the school came to greet him, and they took him back to the college, and he began to meet the professors. He became disheartened. He became downcast. It was depressing because he said that in most cases, the kinds of people that he was finding that were teaching and working in these facilities and calling themselves scientists, he said they weren't at all the kind of people that he envisioned and hoped for. He said they certainly weren't the kind of people that that he wanted to strive to be like. And he said that they were docile and pasty and uninteresting and dull and bland and boring, insect-like, narrow-minded, not open-minded. He said that these people weren't exploring new boundaries. They weren't investigating new ideas. He said that they were just, people being paid to put in time and a work to maintain a status quo and to pretend like they were, engaged in some kind of field where, and it was basically a corporate government shit show, and these people he said what it really came down to was they didn't have passion for science for the sake of it. And so that really got him down, and he said that when the train had left the last school and it was on the tracks, he couldn't take it anymore. And this is a true story, by the way. And he said that as the train was, rumbling down the tracks, he just determined, I'm not going to go to any of these places. So he jumped from the train as it was moving, broke his arm, and somehow from wherever he was, he went home and didn't continue on the... But he did become a scientist, became an astrophysicist. He ended up with degrees in things like, also like psychology, etc. And he didn't take the common path. It's like Robert Frost said, 2 roads diverged in a wood. One was covered in undergrowth, and the other one looked like it was well trodden. And Frost says that he decided to take, the less traveled path that looked a little bit rough. And he said that made all the difference. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the path that is less trodden. So here are some of the subjects that we're going to be covering, because when you get a grasp of this, you'll be able to start to understand the paranormal much better. And we're going to cover themes such as time, space, gravity, art, synchronicity, the mind. Now, I'm going to just throw a few tidbits out there. I'm going to try to make individual videos on each of these thematically. There's different degrees of depth that we can go into for each of these topics. And we'll cover other subjects too, but those are some of the first ones that we're going to do. But when you engage in learning something, what's helpful is when something exciting comes informationally to you, and it changes your perception of reality and your sense of self and your relation to reality, that motivates you to want to learn more and start to apply these things. So here's a couple of things I'm going to toss out just as ideas, and this will kind of whet your appetite for things that are coming up. Something that most people don't know in relation to the mind and time. So for the average person, there is a 400 millisecond delay on your senses, sense information coming from your neurology becoming recognized in the brain. So what that literally means is, people often say, we should live in the moment, be in the now. But the reality is that almost everything that you experience, every sensory, experience you have, is always recognized in the brain 400 milliseconds after it's occurred. So what that means is the sound of my voice you're hearing right now as I'm speaking it is not happening in the moment you're hearing it. As you listen to my voice, you have the impression that you're hearing my voice in the current moment, but you're not. And the reason for that is that because your hearing has a 400 millisecond delay before you even recognize it inside your head, everything that you review, whether it's what you're tasting, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, these are always in the past. And so this when you really start to think about what that means, it has kind of a profound impact, because if you're sitting down in a chair right now, there's a pressure against your butt. Well, although it seems like the pressure against your butt is occurring in the moment, it actually isn't. You're sensing everything always in the past. And so what that means is, you, the observer, whoever or whatever you really are, is not in the same time relationship as the rest of your senses. And so a question arises, if that's the case, when are you? And are you actually engaged? You, the observer, are you actually engaged in what you could properly call the present moment? Because your physiology isn't. It's like, remember I told you at the beginning of this video the dream I had about the photos and the albums and how we were looking at things from the past in our life? So recall that in the context of what we're talking about right now, and understand that it's highly significant that the moments in your life that you think you're living in the moment, you're always an observer at a different place in time space, observing everything that's occurring to you in your life as being in the past. And so what this implies is that there is a higher order in the very nature of your consciousness. Whoever or whatever you really are, everything that you're experiencing in this particular reality is, you have to be a time traveler every moment of your life, and you're always traveling in the past, because whoever or whatever you really are is not in what we would normally properly define contextually as the moment. Whoever or whatever you are is in a future time forward from what you're actually experiencing. We'll cover things about that a little bit more as we go along. We're also going to talk about the nature of space. And one of the things we're going to get into is there's a new concept in physics called frame dragging. And I don't have time to get into all of it here, but frame dragging conceptually is similar to a movie film strip. So, in the old days, you'd go to a theater, there'd be a film projector, and that film projector, is a long strip of cellophane, and the film strip is a series of individual frames of a given scene, so that when we string these together and we run them, everything seems like an apparent animated film. So when we watch it on the screen, it seems to be happening in real time. Part of space, in a really concrete, meaningful way, is constructed like a film strip. It actually really is. And physicists have been looking at this through the idea of frame dragging. However, there are important secrets associated with the concept of frame dragging that not even physicists really have a grasp on. And we're going to be covering some of those. And they're absolutely essential and critical. If you intend and plan to have a successful experience at investigating the paranormal, you're going to be in dire need of, I suppose, what I'm going to teach you about the secrets of frame dragging. Because without these, you're going to get lost in the woods. And we're also going to take a look at the nature of gravity there are relationships between gravity and time that are fundamentally important, and we're going to get into some key concepts about that. Also, we're going to take a look at synchronicity, what it is, how it actually works. There's a lot of information on synchronicity that just doesn't make it out to the public, which is a shame. And these are things that are very revealing and critically important. And there are things that you can actually do, experiments that you can perform and duplicate with repeatability that are really, really essential. A lot of people often talk about, the seeing of numeric patterns, like 111, this kind of thing. Just about nobody really knows what's going on there. There's a lot of different memes floating about. There's a few speculations and ideas as to what that's about. A few people have offered, what appear to be reasonable explanations. We're going to go over some critical elements of that. I'm going to describe to you what's actually happening with you and with other people when they're seeing these repeat numbers. And I'd have to say that 99% or more of the people that I've run across to talk about this phenomena aren't aware of this, and so you will be. We're going to also cover art itself, and we're going to be able to objectively, absolutely describe in a fundamental way the differences between good art versus bad art, because there is a way to tell that. There are universal constants and there are universal absolutes, believe it or not, that govern art. Art is not simply subjective. Most people aren't aware of this, but there is actually rock solid principles that govern objective art. Subjective art will affect people in different ways, and that's what mostly we have access to. Objective art doesn't do that. Objective art affects people the same way. And again, probably, unfortunately, very few people are aware of that, and so it's been intentionally restricted from the public eye. So anyway, that's our safari. That's the introduction to topics. More to follow. Hope you're all doing well, and we'll be in touch soon. I'm going to put some links in the comment section below. In our previous video, I gave you some homework assignments, and so my guess is that you've been pouring through some of that material, and in this video, I will be giving you additional assignments for you to follow up on. And I don't know when the next video will come out, but do your best to get through the materials in the comment section, because this will help give you a framework for upcoming exciting lesson material. And I wish you all the best. We'll be in touch soon.
I was riding on a concrete slab down the river of a useless lab. It was such a beautiful day. I heard a witch doctor say, I'll steer you into a toadstool. I'm looking for the joke with a microscope. A muscle twitching auto swerves. You want to speak, you lose your nerve. Infinity throws you a curve, dumps you in shit you don't deserve. As life when the desert whispered to me. He said, isn't this a shame? Things will never be the same.